boys and girls, and welcome to this week's edition of Tucked In Tuesday. I'm really sorry that last week we had some technical difficulties and we weren't able to send out our video to you, but hopefully you had a really good Thanksgiving and you're ready to hear the rest of Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and hear a really cute story this week called Mr. Duck Means Business. This is a silly story about Mr. Duck, who likes things a certain way, but some of his friends come over and things kind of go a little crazy. So here we go, Mr. Duck Means Business by Tammi Sauer, and it's illustrated by Jeff Mack. Mr. Duck Means Business by Tammi Sauer, illustrated by Jeff Mack. Mr. Duck lived by himself at the pond. Each day he followed a tight schedule. From 6 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock, he would stretch his wings. From 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock, he would fluff his feathers. At precisely 8:01, he would glide across the perfectly still water. "Ah," said Mr. Duck, "it's so peaceful, so quiet. I have everything I need." Day after day, week after week, and year after year, everything was the same, and Mr. Duck was very happy. Then one especially hot summer day, Mr. Duck had just begun his morning gliding when he saw... Pig? Look out below! Oink, oink! Splash! Mr. Duck sputtered, he muttered, he tail a-fluttered. But Pig did not get the message. Mr. Duck was all set to give Pig a strongly worded speech regarding private property when... "Well, there you are," said Cow. "Let's see your moves," called Pig. "Jump in." You don't mind, do you, Mr. Duck?" said Cow as she plowed past. "Moo, moo!" Splash! Mr. Duck grumbled. He mumbled. He flip-flop fumbled. But Pig and Cow did not get the message. Mr. Duck was all set to tell them what's what when, "Hey," said Goat, "we've been looking all over for you." "Anyone up for a game of Marco Polo?" called Pig. "Last one is in is a rotten egg," cheeped a chick. "Come on, Mr. Duck," said Cow, "you're it." The water got wild, the scenery got crowded, and the peace and quiet, it was gone. Mr. Duck tapped. He flapped. He totally snapped. Quack! And somebody got the message. "Perhaps we've overstayed our welcome," said Chick. "Oh," said the other animals. "Out, out, out of my pond," cried Mr. Duck. "This time I mean business. So sorry, my apologies. Goodbye for good," said Mr. Duck. "Sorry to have bothered you," said Chick. "Thanks for letting us swim in your pond." Alone at last, Mr. Duck returned to his routine. He stretched his wings. There was no splashy belly flopping. He fluffed his feathers. There was no annoying water ballet. He glided across the perfectly still water. There was certainly no rowdy round of Marco Polo. "Ah," said Mr. Duck. "So peaceful, so quiet. And that's just the way I like it." On Monday, quiet. On Tuesday, very quiet. On Wednesday, peaceful. On Thursday, very peaceful. On Friday, On Saturday, Mr. Duck twiddled his feathers, peacefully and quietly, of course. And on Sunday, Mr. Duck had a plan. These days, Mr. Duck still loves to stretch at 6 o'clock. He still loves to fluff his feathers at 7 o'clock. He still loves to glide across the perfectly still water at precisely 8:01. But sometimes life calls for a little noise. Welcome noise from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m., especially with friends. The end. So what did you think of that story, boys and girls? I was glad that even though Mr. Duck got his alone time and he got to swim quietly by himself, I'm glad he realized that sometimes it's still really fun to have our friends around. Okay, now we are going to move right into Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. Make sure it's still recording. Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. We've got 2 chapters left to read, and wait until you find out what crazy things Fudge gets into this time. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 9 is called Just Another Rainy Day. The next day it rained. My father asked me how I'd like to go to the movies. Just me, I asked. No, all 3 of us, he said. Fudge is so very young to go, I said, don't you think? Maybe, but I can't think of anything else to do with him, and that will take up a few hours. You could give him some socks, I suggested. You know he loves to play with your socks. Socks won't last the whole afternoon, my father said. That's why I thought of the movies. What will we see, Dad? My father checked his New York magazine. A Bear's Life is playing in the neighborhood. How does that sound? What's it about, I asked. A Bear's Life, I guess, my father said. It's G. I was thinking of a good Western with lots of action, but my father had made up his mind. A Bear's Life it was. I suggested that my father get Fudge cleaned up, because by then he was looking kind of messy. I don't think my father even put him into his pajamas last night. He's been wearing the same polo shirt ever since my mother left yesterday morning. By 1 o'clock, we were ready to go. All 3 of us wore our raincoats and rubber boots, and my father took his big black umbrella. One thing about New York, it's hard to get a cab when it's raining. But the movie theater isn't very far away. My father said the walk would do us all good. There were a lot of puddles. It was really pouring. I like to walk in rain, especially if it isn't too cold out. It feels nice when it hits your face. I jumped over the puddles, and my father avoided them too. But not Fudge. He jumped right into every one and splashed around like a little duck. By the time we got to the movie theater, the bottoms of his pants were soaked. My father took him into the men's room. He stuffed a bunch of paper towels up each pant leg so Fudge wouldn't have to sit around wet. At first, Fudge complained, but when my father brought him a big box of popcorn, he forgot all about his stuffed pants. Right after we got settled into our seats, a big boy sat down in front of Fudge. So we had to change seats with my father. Now he was on the aisle, and I was in the middle, and my father was on the other side. When the lights dimmed, Fudge said, "Ooh, dark." I told him, "Be quiet, you can't talk in the movies." "Okay, Peter," he said. That's when he started throwing popcorn. At first I didn't notice, but I wondered why the people in front of us were all turning around every second. Then I heard Fudge whisper, "Pow, pow, pow," when I saw him throw a handful of popcorn. I poked my father. "He's throwing his popcorn," I whispered. My father reached across me and tapped Fudge on the leg. "If you throw one more piece, I'm going to take it away from you." "No throw," Fudge said very loud. "Shh," said the people in front of us. "Shh," Fudge said back to them. "You see, I told my father he's too young for the movies. He doesn't understand." But from the moment the first bear came on the screen, Fudge sat still and watched. And after a while, I forgot all about him and concentrated on the movie. It was much better than I thought it would be. It showed all these bear cubs and how they live. I'm not sure when I realized Fudge was gone. I guess it was when I turned around to ask him if he had any popcorn left. I'd already finished mine and was still hungry. I was really surprised to see he wasn't there. I mean, one minute he was sitting right next to me, and the next minute he was gone. "Hey, Dad," I whispered to my father. "He's gone." "What?" my father asked. "Fudge isn't in his seat." My father looked over. "Where did he go?" "I don't know. I just noticed he was gone." "Let me out, Peter. I'll have to find him." "Should I come too?" I asked. "No, you sit here and watch the rest of the picture. He's probably wandering around the candy counter." I stood up to let my father out. I wondered what my mother would think if she knew Fudge was lost in the movies. A few minutes later, the picture stopped, right in the middle of a scene. The soundtrack trailed off like a broken record, and all the lights came on. The audience let out a groan. Some kid yelled, "Boo!" Then my father and 2 ushers and a man in a suit came over to me. "He was sitting right here," my father told them, pointing to the empty seat in the aisle. "Well," the man in the suit said, "we've checked the restrooms and the office. He's not behind the candy counter. We'll have to search the theater." He cupped his hands loud over his mouth and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We'll continue with our film in 1 moment, but first we have to find a 3-year-old boy answering to the name of Fudge." Some people laughed when the man said his name. I guess Fudge does sound funny if you're not used to it. I thought, maybe he's been kidnapped. Would my mother be mad? That crazy kid. You can't even take him to the movies. Then I thought, who'd want to kidnap him anyway? "What should I do, Dad?" I asked. "Why don't you walk up and down the aisle and call him, Peter?" "Okay," I said. "Here, Fudge," I called, starting down the aisle. I sounded like I was calling a dog. "Come on out, Fudge." When I got down to the first row and called, "Here, Fudge," he popped out at me. He scared me, so I yelled, "Ah!" "Hi, Peter," he said. "Hey, I found him," I called. I found him, here he is." Then I turned to my brother. "You silly, what were you doing way down here? And why are you sitting on the floor?" "Wanted to touch the bears," Fudge said, "but bears are all gone." He spread out his arm and said, "All gone again." My father and the usher and the man in the suit ran to us. Fudge, my father said, scooping him up. Are you all right? He wanted to pet the bears, I said. Can you beat that? Well, I guess we can continue the picture now, the man in the suit said. He cupped his hands around his mouth again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our young man has been found safe and sound. Now we can return to the conclusion of a bear's life. My father carried Fudge back to our seats. He held him on his lap for the rest of the show. I guess he wasn't taking any more chances. Later, when we got home, my father explained to Fudge that the movies are like TV. It's just a picture. There's nothing to touch. Fudge listened, but I don't know whether he believed my father. I had the feeling that he still thought those bears were in the theater somewhere. I made up my mind that I would never take my little brother to the movies. Never. At least not until he was 9 or 10. My father said he was going to cook us something special for dinner, to celebrate finding Fudge at the movies. I thought that was really strange, because as far as I know, my father can't cook anything. He doesn't even know where my mother keeps the peanut butter, the dishes, or the pots and pans. Luckily for him, I knew where to show him. What are you going to cook, Dad? A super-duper omelet, he said. Omelet? I'm not sure me and Fudge like omelets. You'll like this one, my father said, humming as he gathered his ingredients together. Get me a big frying pan, Peter. Okay, I said. I gave it to him. He melted some butter in it. What's going in this super-duper omelet, I asked, while Fudge sat on the floor banging 2 pot covers together. Well, the eggs, of course, my father said. Omelets are made of eggs. And what else, I asked. Oh, I think I'll make a mushroom omelet. Eggs and mushrooms, I said. Yes, you'll love it. I'm not so sure. You'll see, Peter, my father said. I set up the table while my father cooked. I even put Fudge in his booster chair. When the omelet was done, my father brought it to us. He was still humming. That's some big omelet, I said when I saw it. It filled up the whole frying pan. How many eggs did you use? About a dozen, my father said. Mom only cooks 1 at a time, I told him. When you taste this, you'll know why I used them all up. You mean it's that good, I asked. Go on, my father said as he served me. Taste it. I took a bite. It was awful. It was the worst thing I ate in my life. But my father was standing there grinning at me, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Well, he said. It's nice, I told him. Swallowing a chunk whole, I washed it down with a glass of milk. You see, your mother ought to experiment more. Then you'd learn to eat a lot of different things. I don't think Mom ever made me a mushroom omelet, I said. My father put some on Fudge's plate, then he served himself. Fudge shoved a lot into his mouth at once. I waited. I figured he'd choke on it. Instead, he said, "Oh, good." My father beamed. Fudge wasn't smart enough to fool my father, so he must have really liked it. But a kid that can eat flowers and swallow teeth wouldn't know much about omelets anyway. Then my father sat down and tasted his super-duper concoction. He not only choked on it, he spit it out. Oh, he said, this is awful. Something went wrong. Maybe the eggs are rotten. Mom just bought them on Thursday, I said. Maybe it's the mushrooms, then my father said. Maybe it's how you cooked it, I suggested. My father jumped up from the table and threw the mushroom omelet into the garbage. Fudge started to cry, "Want more!" No, my father told him it wasn't any good. Fudge screamed, "Eat it or wear it! Eat it or wear it!" He flung his spoon across the room. It hit my mother's favorite plant. The dirt spilled all over the kitchen floor. "Now you stop that," my father yelled at Fudge. "I'm going to make a nice peanut butter sandwich for us. Then you're going to have a bath. Your mommy's coming home tomorrow, and we're going to show her how well Daddy managed all by himself. Peter, where did your mother hide the peanut butter?" After supper, my father bathed Fudge. The only thing he decided not to do were the dishes. He stacked them in the sink and then left them for my mother. On Sunday afternoon, we drove to the airport to meet my mother's plane. On the way there, my father said, "Wouldn't it be fun if we kept all the things we did over the weekend a secret, just between the 3 of us, kind of a man's secret?" I agreed not to say a word, and my mother was so glad to see us that she didn't even mention the dirty dishes in the sink. 6 weeks later, we were watching TV one night when the new Toddle Bike commercial came on. "That's me," Fudge said. My mother looked up from her book she was reading. "He does look like you, Fudge, but that's not really you." "Oh, yes," Fudge said. "That's me, see?" My mother squinted and looked harder. "You know, Warren," she told my father, "he really does look like Fudge." Then she laughed. "Imagine another little boy like Fudgy." "It's Fudge all right," I said. "It's Fudge all right," my brother repeated. "We didn't tell you, dear," my father said. "We thought that you'd like to be surprised, but that is Fudge." "What?" my mother said, like she couldn't believe it. "You see, Mom," I began, "remember that weekend you went to visit Aunt Linda?" Then I stopped and thought about all the things my mother didn't know, like the puddles Fudge splashed him, and the paper towels up his pants, and how he wanted to touch the bears and the mushroom omelet, and Mr. Vincent and his big cigar, and Janet and her goldfish crackers. And I looked at my father and I started to laugh. So did he. All right, chapter 10. This is my favorite chapter. It's called Dribble. I will never forget Friday, May 10th. It's the most important day of my life. It didn't start out that way. It started out ordinary. I went to school, ate my lunch, I had gym, and then I walked home from school with Jimmy Fargo, and we planned to meet at our special rock in the park as soon as we changed our clothes. In the elevator, I told Henry I was glad summer was coming. Henry said he was too. When I got out on my floor, I walked down the hall and opened the door to my apartment. I took off my jacket and hung it in the closet. I put my books on the hall table next to my mother's purse, and then I went to my room to change my clothes to check on Dribble. The first thing I noticed was my chain latch. It was unhooked. My bedroom door was open, and there was a chair smack in the middle of my doorway. I nearly tumbled over it. I ran to my dresser to check Dribble. He wasn't there. His bowl with the rocks and water was there, but Dribble was gone. I really got scared. I thought maybe he died while I was at school and I didn't even know about it. So I rushed into the kitchen and hollered, "Mom, where's Dribble?" My mother was baking something. My brother sat on the kitchen floor, banging pots and pans together. "Be quiet," I yelled at Fudge. "I can't hear anything with all that noise." "What did you say, Peter?" my mom asked me. I said, "I can't find Dribble. Where is he?" "You mean he's not in his bowl?" my mother asked. I shook my head. "Oh, dear," Mother said. "I hope he's not crawling around somewhere. You know I don't like the way he smells. I'm going to have to look in all the bedrooms. You check in here, Peter." My mother hurried off. I looked at my brother. He was smiling. "Fudge, do you know where Dribble is?" I asked calmly. Fudge kept smiling. "Did you take him? Did you, Fudge?" I asked not so calmly. Fudge giggled and covered his mouth with his hands. I yelled, "Where is he? What did you do with my turtle?" No answer from Fudge. He banged his pots and pans together. I yanked the pots out of his hands and I tried to speak softly. "Now tell me where Dribble is. Just tell me where my turtle is and I won't be mad if you tell me. Come on, Fudge, please." Fudge looked at me. "It's in tummy," he said. "What do you mean it's in tummy?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Dribble in tummy," he repeated. "What tummy?" I shouted at my brother. "This one," Fudge said, rubbing his stomach. "Dribble in this tummy, right here." I decided to go along with the game. "Okay, how did he get in there, Fudge?" I asked. Fudge stood up. He jumped up and down and saying, "I ate him, ate him, ate him." And then he ran out of the room. My mother came back into the kitchen. "Well, I just can't find him anywhere," she said. "I looked in all the dresser drawers and the bathroom cabinets and the shower and the tub and Mom," I said, shaking my head, how could you?" "How could I what, Peter?" Mom asked. "How could you let him do it?" "Let who do what, Peter?" asked Mom. "Let Fudge eat Dribble," I screamed. My mother started to mix whatever she was baking. "Don't be silly, Peter," she said. "Dribble's a turtle." "He ate Dribble," I insisted. "Peter Warren Hatcher, stop saying that," Mom hollered. "Well, ask him. Go ahead and ask him," I told her. Fudge was standing in the kitchen door with a big grin on his face. My mother picked him up and patted his head. "Fudgy," she said to him, "tell Mommy where your brother's turtle is." "In tummy," Fudge said. "What tummy?" Mom asked. "Mine," Fudge laughed. My mother put Fudge down on the kitchen counter where he couldn't get away from her. "Oh, you're fooling Mommy, right?" "No fool," Fudge said. My mother turned very pale. "You really ate your brother's turtle?" Big smile from Fudge. You mean that you put him in your mouth and chewed him up like this?" My mother made believe she was chewing. "No," Fudge said. A smile of relief crossed my mother's face. "Of course you didn't. It was just a joke." She put Fudge down on the floor and gave me a look. Fudge babbled, "No chew, no chew." Gulp, gulp, all gone turtle down Fudge's tummy. Me and my mother stared at Fudge. "You did it," Mom said. "Did so?" Fudge said. "No," Mom shouted. "Yes," Fudge shouted back. "Yes," Mom asked weakly, holding onto the chair with both hands. "Yes," Fudge beamed. My mother groaned and picked up my brother. "Oh, no, my angel, my precious little baby. Oh, no." My mother didn't stop to think about my turtle. She didn't even give Dribble a thought. She didn't even stop to wonder how my turtle liked being swallowed by my brother. She ran to the phone with Fudge, tucked under one arm. I followed. Mom dialed the operator and cried, "Oh, help, this is an emergency. My baby ate a turtle." "Stop that laughing," my mother told the operator. "Send an ambulance right away, 25 West 68th Street. Mom hung up. She didn't look too well. Tears were running down her face. She put Fudge down on the floor. I couldn't understand why she was so upset. Fudge seemed just fine. "Help me, Peter," Mom begged. "Get me blankets." I ran into my brother's room. I grabbed 2 blankets from Fudge's bed. He was following me around with that silly grin on his face. I felt like giving him a pinch. How could he stand there looking so happy when he had my turtle inside of him? I delivered the blankets to my mother. She wrapped Fudge up in them and ran to the front door. I followed and grabbed her purse from the hall and figured she'd be glad I thought of that. Out in the hall, I pressed the elevator buzzer. We had to wait a few minutes. Mom paced up and down in front of the elevator. Fudge was cradled in her arms. He sucked in his fingers and made that slurping noise I liked, but all I could think of was Dribble. Finally, the elevator got to our floor. There were 3 people in it besides Henry. "This is an emergency," Mom wailed. "The ambulance is waiting downstairs. Please hurry." "Oh, yes, Mrs. Hatcher, of course," Henry said. "I'll run her down as fast as I can. No other stops." Someone poked me in the back. I turned around. It was Mrs. Rudder. "What's the matter?" she whispered. "It's my brother," I whispered back. "He ate my turtle." Mrs. Rudder whispered that to the man next to her, and he whispered to the lady next to him, who whispered it to Henry. I faced front and pretended I didn't hear anything. My mother turned around with Fudge in her arms and said, "That's not funny at all." But Fudge said, "Funny, funny, Fudgy." Everybody laughed, everybody except my mother. The elevator door opened. 2 men dressed in white were waiting with a stretcher. "This the baby?" one of them asked. Yes, it is," Mom sobbed. "Don't worry, lady. We'll be to the hospital in no time." "Come on, Peter," my mother said, tugging on my sleeve. "We're going to ride in the ambulance with Fudge." My mother and I climbed into the back of the blue ambulance. I was never in one before. It was neat. Fudge kneeled on a cot and peered out through the window. He waved at the crowd of people that had gathered on the sidewalk. One of the attendants sat in the back with us. The other one was driving. "What seems to be the trouble?" The attendant asked. "This kid looks pretty healthy to me." "He swallowed a turtle," my mother whispered. "He did what?" the attendant asked. "Ate my turtle. That's what I told him." My mother covered her face with her hanky and started to cry again. "Hey, Joe," the attendant called to the driver. "Make it snappy. This one swallowed a turtle." "That's not funny," Mom insisted. I didn't think so either, considering it was my turtle. We arrived at the back door of the hospital. Fudge was whisked away by 2 nurses. My mother ran after him. "You wait here, young man," another nurse called to me, pointing to a bench. I sat down on the hard wooden bench. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have anything to do. There weren't any good books or magazines spread out like when I go to Dr. Cohn's office. So I watched the clock and read all the signs on the walls. I found out that I was in the emergency section of the hospital. After a while, the nurse came back. She gave me some paper and crayons. "Here you are. Be a good boy and draw some pictures. Your mother will be out soon." I wondered if she knew about dribble, and that's why she was trying to be nice to me. I didn't feel like drawing any pictures. I wondered what they were doing to Fudge in there. Maybe he wasn't such a bad little guy after all. I remember that Jimmy Fargo's little cousin once swallowed his most valuable rock from Jimmy's collection, and my mother told me that when I was a little kid, I swallowed a quarter. Still, a quarter's not like a turtle. I watched the clock on the wall for an hour and 10 minutes. The door opened and my mother stepped out with Dr. Cohn. I was surprised to see him. I didn't know he worked in a hospital. "Hello, Peter," he said. "Hello, Dr. Cohn. Did you get my turtle?" "Not yet, Peter," he said, "but I have something to show you. Here are some x-rays of your brother." I studied the x-rays as Dr. Cohn pointed things out to me. "You see," he said, "there's your turtle right there." I looked hard. "Will Dribble be in there forever?" I asked. "No, definitely not. We'll get him out. We gave Fudge some medicine already. That should do the trick nicely." "Kind of medicine?" I asked. "What trick?" "Castor oil, Peter," my mother said. "Fudge took castor oil and milk of magnesia and prune juice too. Lots of that. All those things will help to get Dribble out of Fudge's tummy." "We just have to wait," Dr. Cohn said. "Probably until tomorrow or the day after. Fudge will have to spend the night here. But I don't think he's going to be swallowing anything he isn't supposed to be swallowing from now on." "How about Dribble?" I asked. "Will Dribble be all right?" My mother and Dr. Cohn looked at each other. I knew the answer before he shook his head and said, "I think you may have to get a new turtle, Peter." "I don't want a new turtle," I said. Tears came to my eyes. I was embarrassed and wiped them away with the back of my hand. Then my nose started to run and I had a little sniffle. "I want Dribble," I said. "That's the only turtle I want." My mother took me home in a taxi. She told me my father was on his way to the hospital to be with Fudge. When we got home, she made me lamb chops for dinner, but I wasn't very hungry. My father came home late that night. I was still up. My father looked gloomy. He whispered to my mother, Not yet. Nothing yet." The next day was Saturday, no school. I spent the whole day in the hospital waiting room. There were plenty of people around, and magazines and books too. It wasn't like the hard bench in the emergency hallway. It was more like a living room. I told everybody that my brother ate my turtle. They looked at me kind of funny, but nobody ever said they were sorry to hear about my turtle. Never once. My mother joined me for supper in the hospital coffee shop. I ordered a hamburger, but I left most of it because right in the middle of supper, my mother told me that if the medicine didn't work soon, Fudge might have to have an operation to get Dribble out of him. My mother didn't eat anything. That night, my grandmother came to stay with me. My mother and father stayed at the hospital with Fudge. Things were pretty dreary at home. Every hour the phone rang. It was my mother calling from the hospital with a report. "Nothing yet." "I see," Grandma said. "Nothing happening yet." I was miserable. I was lonely. Grandma didn't even notice. I even missed Fudge banging his pots and pans together. In the middle of the night, the phone rang again. It woke me up, and I crept into the hallway to hear what was going on. Grandma shouted, "Whoopee! It's out! Good news at last!" She hung up and turned to me. "The medicine has finally worked, Peter. All that castor oil and milk of magnesium and prune juice finally worked. The turtle's out." "Alive or dead?" I asked. "Peter Warren Hatcher, what a question!" Grandma shouted. So my brother no longer had a turtle inside of him, and I no longer had a turtle. I didn't like Fudge as much as I thought I did before the phone rang. The next morning, Fudge came home from the hospital. My father carried him into the apartment. My mother's arms were loaded with presents, all for Fudge. My mother put the presents down and kissed him. She said, "Fudgy can have anything he wants, anything at all. Mommy's so happy to have her baby, all better." It was disgusting. Presents and kisses and attention for Fudge. I couldn't even look at him. He was having fun. He probably wasn't even sorry he ate my turtle. That night, my father came home with the biggest box of all. It wasn't wrapped or anything, but I knew it was another present. I turned away from my father. "Peter," he said, "this box is a surprise for you." "Well, I don't want another turtle," I said. "Don't think you can make me feel better with another turtle because you can't." "Who said anything about a turtle, son?" Dad asked. "You see, Peter, your mother and I think you've been a good sport about the whole situation. After all, Dribble was your pet." I looked up. Could I be hearing right? Did they really remember about me and Dribble? I put my hand inside the box. I felt something warm and soft and furry. I knew it was a dog, but I pretended to be surprised when he jumped up on my lap and licked me. Fudge cried, "Oh, doggy, see doggy!" He ran right over and grabbed my dog's tail. "Fudge," my father said, taking him away, "this is your brother's dog. Maybe someday you'll have a dog of your own, but this one belongs to Peter. Do you understand?" Fudge nodded. "Peter's dog." "That's right," my father said, "Peter's dog." Then he turned to me. "And just to be sure, son," he said, "we got a dog that's going to grow quite big, much too big for your brother to swallow." We all laughed. My dog was neat. I named him Turtle to remind me. The end. I love that story. Okay, so my girls have 2 turtles, and I got to tell you, I cannot imagine if either one of them had eaten either of our turtles. I think I probably would have freaked out a little bit like Peter's mom did. All right, boys and girls, I hope you have enjoyed these last few weeks of Tucked In Tuesday. We're actually going to be taking a break from Tucked In Tuesday for the next month or so. We'll be coming back to you in January with some new episodes and a brand new chapter book to read as well. So I hope your teeth are brushed. I hope you're tucked in tight, and we'll see you tomorrow at school. Have a good night.